Welcome to this video on Agile Automation with Tricentis. Today we are going to see how Tricentis enables all testers to keep up with the Agile development. And we do this by using both model-based test automation and supporting open source tools within the Tricentis platform. When we look at just one example on how testing fits into the DevOps chain, you can see we need to integrate into the existing landscape at different phases. So if this cycle represents a single sprint, as the QA team, we have different tasks at different stages that need to be done in order to keep up with the development and our delivery schedule. Generally, there are multiple Agile teams with different skill sets, manual and technical testers. With Tricentis, we work with all your resources to make them more productive. So let's have a look at the simplified view. As a tester, I can be given requirements in a number of ways, and I need to set up my tests with the business logic, find test data, and be ready to run the moment I get access to the build at the end of the sprint. When we use script-based tools, we need to write scripts in our IDE, build a framework to help address the maintenance, then design test data variants, and source test data. We do some early API testing, and once we get the build, we update our tests and frameworks for that environment before we execute them. With Tricentis, our model-based approach is different. We spend most of our time doing test case design, making sure we have the correct test variants and test data to cover your business logic. We also do early API testing, and only once we have access to the build, we create model-based test automation for the UI, as this is the easiest part for us. The good news is, if you have teams that are successfully using open source tools, Tricentis supports them too. We have a BDD plugin, so feature files are in sync with the latest source code. We can import your API tests and execute and report on your existing Selenium tests. This way we have combined reporting, which can be triggered by Tricentis or any other build tool. First, since the majority of testers today are manual, let's look at how any resource can leverage Tricentis model-based test automation in Agile projects. So now we're looking at my desktop, and you can see I have Tricentis Tosca installed, and we can use that to automate all my different technologies end to end. For my example, I'm going to open up Tricentis Tosca here, and you can see I prepared the two examples we mentioned before, how we can keep up with Agile automation in a sprint. And we're going to first look at the model-based approach using Tosca's native functionality. And then we're also going to see how we can work with open source tools as well. But for either of these, my starting point is the requirements. As a tester, I'm given my requirements, and they could be given to me in a number of ways. I could be given, for example, a specification or a wireframes, something that gives me the information of what the application is going to look like and what the business logic is that I need to test against. So in this case, it's a basic insurance calculator. I'm just going to focus on one page in our example today. And you can see if I enter make in the first field, it's going to affect the number of seats and the fuel type. So that's my input. And then based on that, there's a request response that goes back to an API web service and brings me back the available options based on the make that I enter here. So we could also be using requirements or stories in another tool. If that's the case, we can also synchronize these into Tosca and use that information. And I have the same setup over here with the exact same information here. But either way, all of this information is actually going to drive the different data combinations that we create to drive our automation later. And that's what we're going to focus on for now, using the model-based approach. If I jump over here, if you remember from the slide, we said this is the information I've given at the beginning of the sprint based on the requirements and what I need to test against. And then at some point, I get access to the environment. So we need to do all this work up front. And as soon as we have access, we're going to convert them into automated tests for the UI. But you can see all the work we can do in advance. So if I jump back over here, you can see there's my requirements and the information. And what my first step is with Tricentis Tosca is I open up here and I need to create the business logic. So what are the different data combinations I need to test based on my requirements? And we do that by if I click over here, I've already got it started. I've created a little class of my business logic, and this shows me basically my make, my seats, and my fuel that I've set up over here. So based on the input for the makes, I should get an option to select specific seats and specific fuel types. So the way I set this up, we can manually enter this data here. We can import it from Excel or Word documents. But once it's in here, we do need to put some effort into mapping these fields to each other. We do have a way we can actually click and map different instances to each other, but for today I've tried to keep it simple and just showed you a manual setup. So for example, if I right click here and create a new field, call Volvo, I need to test against the Volvo make, and you can see it's gone bold to show I haven't used it yet. And I can map it to a number of seats and a number of fuel types over here from the side. So I've already got a number of combinations set up with the right business logic. So what I need to do now is create a new one here for Volvo. So this is going to be my combination that I'm going to set up with my business logic. And based on the selection of Volvo over here, right at the bottom, I'm going to say the user should be presented with selection of 4 seats, and the fuel type should be petrol, diesel, or electric power. And I can set up as many combinations as I want, but for today I'm just going to select with petrol. So now I've set up that business logic based on the input and what should come back and what they can now choose from the other 2 drop-down lists. So I'll collapse all those. So now my work's done, and this is a reusable, basically it's a little class of your business logic, and if this appears later in your application, you can use it there for UI, API, or if it appears in different technologies that all have the same business rule, we can reuse that. The second step is to create a spreadsheet with all the other data combinations I want to test. So as you remember from here, there's other fields with different data inputs, but there's no business logic associated to this. There might be mandatory fields or optional. So I can set up my data sheet here like I've done, and I've got my different data variants, as you can see over here. But there's no business logic associated to these. They might affect the premium in a different way, but there's no dependencies for that business logic. So what I can do now is based on the ones I do have, I can drag and drop this into my test sheet. Just bring that back into focus. It's at the bottom and move that up to the top here. So what that means is here I've already taken care of my business logic for these fields, and I'll just collapse all these. These ones have no business logic or dependencies, so I can basically just come over here and use a number of built-in combination techniques that Tricentis offers. I'm just going to use linear expansion for today, and you can see now we've got a number of different tests going through different inputs and different outputs, and in this case the only business logic or dependencies is around these ones, and the other ones might affect the premium, but I don't have to worry about that. So I've used my built-in algorithms here to generate tests and taken into account my business logic over here for these 3 fields here. So now that's all set up, and you can see already how important this is. This is where we see the majority of the work should be focused on, because this is the business logic, and this is where you're going to find the most bugs using the correct data, whether it's manual or automated. This is where the important piece is for us. So now that you've got that, this data sheet can actually drive your API and UI tests from that side. So if I collapse now, what we're going to do is, with the assumption that we don't have access to the UI yet, we're still waiting for the Agile team to create that UI and provide us with the build, but we already have access to the API. So if you come over here, you can see I've got a web service running and there's a car service here. So for that first page, it's dependent on this web service here. And let's say this team that set this up is already up and running and we can really test against that. We can set up our API tests using the same data sheet to test against that endpoint over there. So I'm going to come back to Tosca, and we can first focus on our API tests. So I'm going to come over here and I'm going to launch our own internal API scanner for Tricentis. This at the moment is launched from within Tosca, but it's also available as a free standalone tool like any other tools like we're going to look at later, SoapUI and Postman. You can go download this for free, and any number of users can use this. The real value of this is now we can reuse and import everything done in this API scanner into Tricentis Tosca over here. So let's delete all this. And I'm going to start off by using the URI. I can use the actual file definition if the URI or the endpoint isn't up and running to create the test and then execute them when it's ready. But for today, let's keep it simple and just point straight to the endpoint. So I've already copied it. I'm going to paste it here and click OK. And now you can see I have a test that's going to give me my request and also the response over here. For now, let's just make sure it's working. I can already come here and say, let's test, for example, BMW, do a test. And what we should see now is another test against my endpoint. And there's the get car to BMW and the response that came back. Okay? So now as an API tester, and it could be on the Tosca machine, it could be on a different machine, it could be a developer or anyone without access to Tosca, they can do all their API testing here. I can even copy existing ones here, paste it. Let's do a copy and a paste. And you can see I have another one here. I could rename that and also start testing things like other ones like Volvo. And testing in my endpoint over there, and it brought everything back, and you can see over there, there's my Volvo. So here, now what we can do is we can really say, okay, I've done all my API tests. I might have created 10 or 20 different combinations, but with Tosca, we can reuse the data combinations that we set up over here. So I can just grab one of them for a start, and I'm going to tell Tosca to import this into my folder over here. So if I click on that, it's going to push it all in, and now we're going to see the first look at our model-based automation over here. I don't need the API scanner anymore. I can actually close that down. And what we're going to see is a similar view in Tosca, and we're calling this still our technical view. But now we want to data drive it. We might want to point to different endpoints. All the information in here, whether it's the inputs and the outputs, anything here can be parameterized. And another thing we have here is, of course, authentication, but we can set this all up. And then what we'll do is this will be built into the model so that we don't need to look at it later. We can just simply focus on the different data variants we want to test. So if I come back to that, you can see I might want to parameterize the make, which we saw in the data sheet that I set up. Could be the endpoint as well. Just so you can see, anything that I select over here can be parameterized, and as well as all the results that come back over here. So we can add all the results, and we've pulled that out, and we're actually building a little UI in Tosca, so we don't have to look at this complex XML. This is quite a short one. They can be quite lengthy, but at the moment we just need to look at the test section in Tosca. So I'm going to collapse all that. We're going to see now we have a test section. These are the important fields: the name, the value, the action mode. That's how we do all our automation with Tosca across all technologies. And if I right click and expand there, you can see it's all ready for my data over here. And what I can do now is anything I don't want to parameterize, I can just enter it straight into the test. But we know already I've set up my spreadsheet with the other data variants, so I can come to my test cases, convert it to a template, and now I can already drag and drop my data variants into here. If there's anything that's mapped the same, that has the same names, it'll auto map it, like you can see it did over here. Might have to do a little cleanup, and anything not, you can clean up yourself. So in this case, I want to remove that. You can see the makes was mapped correctly, but the seats, I actually want to map it to this variant here because there might be multiple ones coming back. But it's just as simple as coming over here. I can expand it all here. You can see all my different data sheet variants. I can come over here and say simply, okay, when I enter the make, remember these are the ones that have the logic, so that's what's in the endpoint. I can map that to that. And then the seats should be mapped to the seats. And then of course the fuel type to the fuel type. And then let's just clean this up. These values have come actually from the API scanner itself, so it did save that like you saw in the drop-down list. So I need to get rid of those, and I'm just telling Tosca now that these will be mapped straight from the data sheet. So now I have a template set up, a single point of maintenance for my tests, and Tosca will merge my data sheets with my template over here and create physical tests that we can run. And you can see a whole bunch of tests that have been created now based on the different data variants, and I've got that business logic set up as well. So what I can do now is I can select, if I open up a few just so you can see, the first one is Volkswagen, and based on the combinations I set up in advance, that's what we're testing against. The seats and the fuel type that comes back, chaos, petrol, and 4. And of course we can set up as many different variants for different tests that you want. But in this case, we can just see a couple, and I'm going to show you how we can run these. So I can already grab these, and let's just run to Suzuki for now. Actually, let's go up until Volvo, and I can execute these. But just so you can see, we have an execution section here. I'm going to select that. You can see I've got two folders set up for Tosca tests and Selenium tests. I'm going to grab my Tosca tests here, up until Volvo. Expand that one there. I'm going to drag and drop these down and pop them in there. Okay, so now I have my execution section, and I've got my Tosca tests. These are actually my API tests, so I can create another subfolder. API. Let's move them in there. And we can already execute these here from within Tosca. And we should see that all go, and you can see all the different data variants being tested and using the same datasheet. And this is the same datasheet that's going to drive my UI automation later. You can see we had some failures there where some were set up, so we might have even found some bugs very early in the process. If I expand that, you can have a look there and you can see different verifications. And maybe in this particular example here, I tested against, let's expand this so we can see Volkswagen. And in this particular case, no seats came back for some reason. So we could either raise a bug from within Tosca to a defect management tool, speak to developers about that one. So let's collapse that. And we'll create another folder while we're here for the UI tests. In the UI test, of course, we can't actually create the models because we don't have a UI to create it against, but that's okay with Tosca. Again, there's a lot of work we can do in advance here. So I'm going to jump back to the top. Let's collapse that. Our API tests are done. Now we need to focus a bit more on the UI. So for the UI, if I collapse all of these to give us a bit more space, again, we have our data sheet with all our data variants set up. Now what we need to do is create a template. So with Tosca, we can do manual and automated testing. So what we're going to do for Agile tests is we can come over to our data sheet and we can say, these are basically all the different inputs I'm testing against. So I can actually come over here and grab one of them. In this case, I'm going to grab the straight through and then drag and drop it into my test case section. Now you can see there's a straight through test and it's got some information based on the data sheet. And this is already a manual test. We can execute it right away if we wanted to now. But knowing that I'm going to create a model for this later, I can already do some work in preparation for the UI. So I'm going to clean this up a little bit and basically say, I want this as one step because it's going to be one screen, and that's how I'm going to automate later. So I'm going to drag and drop them in there, and you can see how easy it is to navigate around Tosca using drag and drop, copy paste. And I'm going to say this is going to be one field. We're going to need to enter vehicle data at some point, so I can even give it a description. Still a manual test, but the great thing is now is I don't even need this data. I can actually right click here. I can reset it, and I can even add more. So if I know there's going to be a button that says next, I can add a button that says next. You can see it'll just keep adding more and more as needed. Delete that one for now, and you might want to do a click there. So this is a lot of work we can do in advance while we're waiting for the UI. We don't need access to the environment. For us, this is more important that we're correcting with the right data variants. And just like we did with the API, we can convert it to a template, and then we can drag and drop that sheet onto the actual template here. And then again, just like before, I've got my one template, my single point of maintenance. I can instantiate it, which means create data combinations based on the data sheets. And now my single point of maintenance is here. This is my actual test cases. And you can see just like for the APIs, we should have different data combinations in here. So when I select Volkswagen, I should expect to see seats. That's one test, of course. There'll be multiple, and petrol. And that's all based on the same business logic I set up before. And you can see we have some dynamic expressions we can set up, a number of ways we can enter all that into the data sheet so that way we can save our time later. Now let's say that I finally get access to the UI and I can create my models. So I could go through my manual tests and run them, but of course we want to automate them. So if I select my models section over here, collapse that, and let's bring up my environment. The developer says, I've deployed it to your environment, you're up and ready. Now you can go do your testing. This is the screen that my data is going to map against. Within Tosca, I simply come to my module section. I tell Tosca to scan my desktop. If it was another technology, we'd choose a different scanner, but the concept's exactly the same, like we saw with APIs. Tosca has everything it needs to talk to your different technologies. We simply need to scan it, create a model, and you can see I'm selecting my screen, telling Tosca to do my scan. I'm over here and I can simply say, these are the different fields I've been waiting for. I can select them over here, and this is the same model that Tosca is going to build for me, just like we saw with the API tests. So I've selected all of them there, and now my model's complete. That's the only work we have to do to create UI automation, is create this model. That's the foundation. So if I jump back here, there's my model. It represents that particular screen. I can, of course, expand it, and you can see an image there. This model now is the single point of maintenance going forward. The first tester that creates it will make it available, and then every other tester can reuse the same one over and over again. So what we're going to do now is just simply say, this is my test sheet that I've created. It's manual, but now I'm going to convert that into an automated test. So I've done all the hard work up front, created the model, which is super easy, and you can see based on here, anything blue has automatically been mapped based on the naming convention. And if it isn't, you can see seats is named differently, so I can map seats to that because the manual test was named slightly different and now it's gone blue. Same as engine performance, it might be called KW on the website or the property that we picked up, and the date of manufacture as well is over there. And the next button, of course, I added that myself, and there's a button there that we found. Okay, so now everything's automatically mapped, and I manually mapped the ones that weren't named the same, and now with the click of a button, I've converted my manual test into an automated test here. And you can see now my template has been updated with the manual test. If I click on my created tests by Tosca, you'll see there's still manual tests, but I don't need to do anything. That could have hundreds in here of tests. All I do is say, tell Tosca, go through and update all my tests, and now all of them have been updated to automated tests from that side. And just like before, I can run these, but what I'm going to do is just to show you the maintenance. If I ever need to make changes, they're done in the template section, and I'm actually going to remove my click from here so I can run them one after another without going back. Come back here, let's do a quick update, and now the clicks have been removed from the next, and I'm going to grab the same ones I did before, up to Volvo, open up my execution list, and there we go, and let's grab those, drop them in the folder for UI, go back to my sprint, and now I can already execute my UI tests from that side. Okay. So again, you can see exactly what happens and how we can do all the work in advanced, and we're focusing more on the test data combinations itself, making sure we have the right business logic tested, as well as any test data that's dynamic that you might want to source. We can do that in advanced. We don't have to worry about the automation, building that and maintaining that. Tosca does that for us. For us, that's the easy part. Like I mentioned, we want to focus more on finding bugs, which is the business logic and the data combinations, static and dynamic. And you can see there, we've gone through there. It's all perfect from that side, all green. And now we've done a completely automated page with all the different data variants that we've set up in advanced from that side. Okay, so I'll close that one down now. And now that you've seen how easy it is to create both UI and API automation in a more agile environment using the model-based approach with Tricentis Tosca, we can now, as a second step, go and look at the open source example. Now we are going to see the Tricentis BDD plugin, how we can import SOAP UI and Postman tests, and how we can use your existing Selenium tests within our end-to-end testing. This means we can also take advantage of integrated reporting and even our service virtualization. So now we're going to see how Tricentis supports Agile Automation when you're using open source tools. And what we're going to have a look at here is I've got Jira open, and I've also got Tricentis Qtest, which is our test management platform. For this example, I'm going to stick with our insurance calculator application. And what you can see is I've got a sprint number 3 again, and I've got some stories in this particular sprint that started. So I'm going to select the one that relates to the other example, where we had the requirements and we also had the specification. And just like before, we have a make field, and depending on the input, it will affect the fuel type and the seats field. But this time, what I'm going to do is inside Jira, I'm going to use our BDD plugin, which is called Qtest Scenario, that now allows you to create and maintain or import different features into Jira. And this basically will be stored in your repository. And in this case, I've used GitHub as my source code repository. And you can see if I click over here, it'll take me directly to it. And here's my features. And I've got the feature over here for truck in this particular case over here. And this allows a completely up-to-date synchronization, so I can create and maintain them in one place, and it'll automatically update them so that people using Jira and people using Git for the source code or for creating the actual automation will have a live up-to-date version of that. So I'll show you that very quickly. Just if I come over here and say power and other, and then I can hit the old save button there. That's going to save, and using Qtest's integration and webhook. And this is really the fastest way there is to synchronize in real time at the moment. You can see there now other has been updated over here, just like that. So that's the same way it works if you want to keep your stories, your epics, your defects in sync with Tricentis Qtest from a test management perspective. Over there, you can create and maintain them in one place, and we'll get a live up-to-date copy over here using that super fast webhook. But what I'm going to do now is we've got all that set up already. Now your tester can go off and use their IDE to create their different Selenium scripts if that's how they wanted to automate that, or they can use SOAP UI and Postman for the API automation, just like we saw before. And for now, I'm going to just collapse all that. Let's go back to my Tosca machine that we had before, and we're back into Tosca. And just to carry on where we left off, if I come back over here, you can see there's my project that we had set up before, and we can again start off with the API tests. So if you remember before, we said using open source tools, we have the BDD plugin and the Gherkin editor, which we already saw in Jira from that side. Now we're going off to the tester's perspective. They're going to write their scripts using their different tools. They're going to build their frameworks and everything that goes with it to try to keep the maintenance low when you use the script-based solutions. And then, of course, we can do our early access to API testing using either SOAP UI or Postman in this example over here. So what we're going to do here is we're going to come over here to my folder here that says API tests. I'm not actually going to create anything in SOAP UI or Postman, but what we can do from Tosca's perspective is we can come down here and say, now let's import all that work you've done in SOAP UI or Postman into Tosca and make it model-based automation. Just like I did before when I created with my API scanner, which is provided by Tricentis, also as basically as a free tool. We can also work with these. And I'll just show one example for today using SOAP UI. And you can see we've got an importer here for your projects. So again, everything that the API tester or the developer was doing for API, maybe in a different environment, they can save it. And this time I'm going to browse. I'm going to go to a shared folder, Tosca API. And in here, what I've got is a SOAP UI project over here that just tests the pet store. So a little different from what our example is, but it's more the importer I'd like to show you. And if I go OK, click the import button over here, what we're going to see is it'll give us a nice little result to tell us that basically all the test suits, the test cases, steps, and verifications that was actually in the SOAP UI project that was saved has now been imported into Tosca as modules. So if I click OK, again, we're going to open that up. Just like we saw before, we now have modules for everything the tester was using, and we have all the test cases that go with it from that side. So again, you can come into here, just like we did with the Tosca tests, you can go into the actual module itself. We're going to get a more technical view to begin with over here, and then you can parameterize it just like before. So let's do a couple of quick ones just so you can see the functionality will be the same. You can grab the pet ID, grab the endpoint, and I'm just adding them to the model to make it more business readable, and we could data drive it as well. And you can see again with the response, we came back. I think in this case, it's just the JSON path over here, but that's okay. The request will tell us what we need. And if I go to the test case over here, and you can see there again, just like before, we have the endpoint. And then of course we could parameterize all the actual inputs and outputs from there. So if I click over there and expand that, again, this is something that you could then parameterize using our data sheets within Tosca, if that was something you have set up in advance, or you could set it up now and then you can data drive it. But the main thing to see is we can import from SOAP UI and Postman, and they'll become model-based test automation in Tosca, and go down and you can reuse and you can use all Tosca's functionality going forward from then. So that's the API from that side. And now we can look at how can we support the UI from the UI perspective. And the way we do that is we provide the Tosca user, in this case, with these pre-built modules. So you've already got your Selenium tests. What we've got here is a couple of modules, pre-built modules, like before we scanned and we created one for the UI and API. These are pre-built modules that allow you to execute and report on your Selenium tests. And you can see we're pointing to a path, we're pointing to the class and the method, and then we have a reporting directory. And I've already set up a couple of these examples just so you can see. If I jump over here, these are my existing tests that we run in Tosca. And you can see here is my Selenium jar file that I've created. I'm pointing to the actual class and I'm pointing to the method, and it obviously increments, so you can break it up into different pieces as well. And then I've just pointed to my C drive results folder that I've created. So a couple of examples there, just showing you whether you point to the path, you can just point to the DLL or the jar file, or you can drill down a little bit further within the script itself. And what you can then do is, if I collapse these here, you can simply drag them like we do with normal Tosca tests and put them into the Selenium folder over here. Let me grab them again and drop them in there. And now you can see there's the test I ran earlier using Tosca UI and API. And now I've also got my Selenium tests here. And I'll just run them once here so you can see them run directly from within Tosca. And in this case, because they were developed in Selenium, all that information is actually stored in the Selenium test and in the framework, depending how you set that up. But in this case, they were pointed to the Chrome browser, so that's what they were executing in over there. And I've got two different ones. One was actual web-based, and the others were JUnit or NUnit, so it was just a calculator running. So they went pretty fast, but you can see straight away when it passes and fails. I had two different tests there, and this one passed, this one failed, and you can see it'll actually tell you the total results and success over there. You can expand them here as well, and there's the actual path as to where the results goes. So if I wanted to, I could actually jump to the results and see what happened, and this is the results created by Selenium itself from here. And in this case, it was all successful and everything passed, so there was no issues. But this is all Selenium functionality from there. But you can see now you can make it as a part of your end-to-end testing from an automation perspective if you want to include both Tosca and Selenium tests. So that really helps for the execution and also the reporting side as well, as you can see over here. Okay, so the last piece we actually want to see is the execution, how they get run. Besides executing them from Tosca, we can also execute them from Tricentis Q-test. So that's something I'd like to show you as well. But we can also execute them from a build tool such as Jenkins as well. So for the last piece, I'm just coming into Tosca, and what I'm going to do is get Q-test to actually kick off my execution. So I'm going to come here and clear the log files. Let's just come over here, say clear them all. And you can see we have 32 tests, some are Tosca, some are Selenium, and I've cleared them so that when I run this, you can see it will update this directly into Tosca when the run is over. So for now, I'm just going to close down my Tosca workspace. And what we're going to get set up here is we have a couple of things. We have our own Tosca CI little client that I'm using together with Q-test. So Q-test is the test management that has all the executions. You can schedule it, you can run them, and you can report on that side. And Tosca is actually the automation piece. So this is where it's actually going to run the tests. So we have a little Tosca agent that sits here waiting for a call from either a build tool, or in this case, it's going to be Q-test, but it could be Jenkins as well. And then what we also have here is I've got my web services, and I just refreshed it, so that's all we're going to see. And we have our UI. So all those data-driven UI and API tests are going to run. Then my Selenium tests are going to run in Chrome browser. And that's all going to be kicked off if I close down my virtual machine here, come back over here to where we left off. This time we're going to see QTest Manager, where we have our test executions, which we're focusing on today. There's a previous run I did before, but there's going to be a new one created for the execution I kick off now. And we are going to use QTest Launch to actually trigger them. So they can be scheduled, but in this case, if I click over here and I'm going to go to host, this is basically the IP address of my virtual machine that I'm using down here. And if I come in here and just to show you a quick look at the setup, we've given it an agent name, given it my name over there. You can say the agent type. You can see there's a whole bunch of different types we support from Tricentis QTest. Over there, I'm going to use the universal agent, which will leverage Tosca's little CI client. Some examples over there, but basically we're just passing in this little executor with some command lines over here that tells it where to go on the machine, where to run, where to store the results. They'll get sent back in a JUnit format, sent back to QTest, back to your build tool, however you want to set that up from there. So now all we need to do, we set that up once and we hit the run button. And I'm just going to execute it now. Of course, we can trigger them in different ways, but for now, let's just hit the execute button. I'm going to jump back to my machine. And what we should see here in the Tosca CI client is you can see it says getting license. It's navigating to my workspace, and it's just going to run the test the same way I did the right click from the green section in Tosca, the execution, and hit run. QTest has actually triggered that for me in this case. And we can have that triggered in a number of different ways, which we mentioned as well. And what we're going to see now is it's going to go through, there's all the web tests running on the right-hand side, doing all the web service calls. We always promote doing API testing where possible. We can cover a large number of combinations a lot quicker than the UI side. But what I've set up is both the UI and the API, the same data-driven sheet. And at the end of this, once this finishes running, we're actually going to run the 2 different Selenium tests as well over there. And then we can have a look at the reporting when that's finished as well. Okay. So that should be just finishing up now. There's Volvo. Remember the Volvo I put in last. That's going to be about done. And now it's going to do the Selenium test as well. And you can see that's in the Chrome browser in this case. So that's going through all the different pages. And that's done. And what I'm going to do is launch Tosca, open up my workspace again. But if I jump back to the actual client, what you'll see here is that's running. And now it's going to be sending the result back to QTest in this case with all the information as well. So you can see everything set up over there. And this is what QTest will be using to actually create the reporting from that side. So I can close that down. That's all run. I can jump over here and you can see there we have our new automation and all the different tests we were running from that side, both UI, API. Remember there was a few failures in the API side as well as the Selenium tests as well that ran and passed from here as well. So you can see now how we can use Tricentis QTest for test management, Tricentis Tosca for the automation tool, but again we can support Selenium and open source tools as well. So thanks for watching. Bye.